The Grand Chess Tour Blitz and Rapid event in Zagreb concluded on Sunday with a victory for Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. But I'd like to highlight the play of the player in second place, Viswanathan Anand, who played superbly. And here he is against Nepomniachtchi, of course, the challenger for the world title at the end of the year. So Vichy playing white. This is how you play when you're 51 years old, and Vichy really gave a superb lesson in this game. So it's Taimanov Sicilian, and knight c6 takes, and queen f3. This is quite a trendy variation. Has good reputation for white, but you can see that black has this nice central position, so that can be hard to break down. Queen g3, this is a relatively modern idea. So the queen is looking at g7, just making it a little bit difficult for black to develop. Now, of course, as one would expect, a simple developing move like knight f6 is normal here, but Nepo played f5. Now that's an outrageous move, making yet another pawn move. But also, after this exchange, you can see that there is a big hole on e5. Now, the Soviet school of chess would normally be shaking their heads at a move like this, but well, you can get away with it. It does clear the central situation, and in fact, Nepo has played this before against Nakamura and did absolutely fine. Bishop f4 from Vichy. Of course, a very logical move, claiming this diagonal, and the bishop looks at this hole on e5. Why not? Knight f6, bishop e2. Now, here is a very clever move from Nepo. Of course, black needs to develop. At the moment, that pawn is hit by the queen, so you certainly can't play bishop out and castles. So rook a7 protects this pawn, but more than that, the rook, I think, controls these squares along the 7th rank, and that can be very useful. Castles, and in fact, Nepo doesn't even bother bringing this bishop out, he just plays king f7, but I think, it's nice to have the cover of this rook, actually. So let's see how Vichy is playing. Well, he is not reacting too much to black's moves. He's just playing his pieces out to sensible squares. He's played this modest bishop move and he's castled. h6, right, now we can see the grand plan of Nepo. He's advancing on the king side. Wow, it's really ambitious. But when you have these pawns that protect the middle of the board, then black can actually get away with this to a certain extent. I think that's the point. I mean, normally such an advance on the king side would be very risky indeed. So how do you react against this? Do you play f4? I mean, a move like this is plausible, but no, Vichy is very calm. Rook e1. This is really good practical chess. I think when you play blitz, you just want to keep your pieces together, everything working nicely. You don't need to react to such outlandish pawn moves. Bishop g7. So Nepo developing is going to bring his king's rook into play. So, he's actually constructed a reasonable position and getting decent development. He doesn't need to bring the bishop on c8 into play. It is in play at the moment. Bishop f1, but Vichy just very calm. You can see he has beautiful harmony in his position. All his pieces stand very well and they're working really well together. So he's not trying to refute black's opening. He's just playing sensible moves. And the bishop just nudges back. That's fine. And Nepo brings his rook into play from the corner. Rook takes, and queen d3. So this queen could potentially be hit by a pawn or maybe a knight. So the queen just comes back into the middle. So it's just really sensible chess, pragmatic chess from Vichy. I mean, there were moments earlier where, the machine recommends moves like f4, but the thing is, you want to keep pawns in front of your king in a blitz game. You want to keep a safe king. Later on, when the position opens, well, let's see whose king is safer. That's one thing. But also, it's just about keeping your pieces together, everything nicely protected, not making unnecessary pawn moves. You can see very efficient development from Vichy. I mean, the computer thinks that white is slightly better here, but that assessment means nothing. It's about how easy the position is to play and whether your opponent can hit anything. And very hard to find a weakness in white's position here. A3, very calm. So it could be that he's intending b4 to claim a square, but let's see. A5, well, that stops that. Knight a4, so potentially a piece can hop into a4. Bishop g4 attacks the rook here, so pawn to f3, and the bishop comes back. And the knight hops in c5, and now it drops back to c8. Queen c3, so nice placement of the queen behind the bishop, looking down the diagonal and supporting the knight here as well. And, well, one way for black to play is to exchange pieces here with knight d7. But not to Nepo's taste. He goes for the attack with g4. Okay, how do you meet this? Well, Vichy is just very calm. He brings his knight back to d3. Now that's a lovely square where it hits the pawn on f4. It looks at the e5 square and even opens up the c file here. Nice move. Just very tidy. He's not overreacting. Pawn takes pawn, and knight d7. So now Nepo exchanges pieces in a tactical way, because after bishop takes, there is a pin here with rook g8. But you know, you have to ask yourself, whose king is the safer here? Vichy nudges the king into the corner, where it's pretty well protected. You've got to watch out for an attack on the g file here. But black's king lacks pawn cover, and that's what Vichy is playing for. Queen takes, so he's breaking through. Queen g5. Threat of mate, of course. So bishop h3. I mean, if Vichy can hold this position together, it looks as though he should be winning, considering that black's king is looking open, and white's pieces, well, it's slightly stretched now, but still a pretty compact position, actually. Knight b6. Right, that opens things up here. Now you've got to be careful. Of course, that bishop can't be taken because there's a mate. Bishop g4. But Vichy, very calm. Bishop takes and pawn takes. So because of the fork on e5, of course that pawn on g4 can't be taken. Things opening up a little bit for white's king. And Nepo realizes that he needs a safer spot for his king and just moves it backwards. But now Vichy has a little bit of a dilemma. You know, what do you do about the king? Because it's becoming a little bit more open. Well, queen takes knight feels very dubious, and I suspect it is, yes. Queen takes pawn, threatens a mate here, and the rook is attacked as well, so that's no good. Instinctively, Anand brings his knight back, and I think, again, it's a very tidy move. You could also play h3, but knight f2 feels very practical. Knights are very good defenders of the king. So it gets close to the king. It also controls g4. It also controls rather important e4 square. It looks at h3 as well. And it also, makes room for the rook as well. In case this knight moves, then the d pawn can be taken. So another tidy move. Rook g6, attacking the queen, queen check, and rook e1. The rook activates. So Anand has secured his king position, and now he can attack with a clear conscience. Rook g7. Nepo needs to protect his king. And now another very practical move from Anand. So he can't see a clear win at that end of the board, at the other end of the board, but he's clearly concerned about this knight flying into the position. So he just plays b3 to shut out the knight. So it's all about containment. The knight comes back to d7. So this knight trying to find a way into the position, and also perhaps protecting the king as well. Queen e6. So the queen comes back. Rook e5 hits the queen, which goes backwards, and queen f5. Well, Vishy judges that with so many isolated pawns, then the endgame should be promising, basically. There's no need to, well, one has no time to calculate variations, but it's just a practical feel, and that does indeed feel right. But Nepo finds counterplay. Rook c7, looking at the pawn on c2. Anand takes the pawn on f4. So the queen has come all the way back from that end of the board, but it helps in the protection of the king. So he's maintaining the pressure, but he's keeping enough pieces around his king. So again, all very practical. Rook takes c2. Rook e7 check. Well, that's a tricky move, because if the king comes back here, then queen b8 is immediately decisive. So the king comes back to h8. Rook e6, pinning, pin and win. We like that. King g7. So it's all about keeping black tied up, which just makes it very difficult for black to do anything really active here. And here, well, h4 is a winning move, because that takes away the g5 square from the queen. And then there are threats to possibly push with g5, maybe just queen e5 as well in some positions. Obviously, you've got to watch out for that knight, but h4 is a winning move. But in some ways, if you have no time to calculate, then h4 is a destabilizing move, because it can leave that pawn unprotected. And Vishy's move is so typical of his style. h3, just protecting that pawn, and that means if an ending arises, then the pawn structure is safe. Means the g4 pawn is protected. So yeah, very safe, but it's a practical move, and it means that the onus is on black to prove something now, and that's not easy in blitz. Here Nepo brought the queen away from the pin, queen f7, and that is a losing move. He's on the edge and he gets it wrong. Queen g5 should be played, and the end game is really not bad for black, considering the rook is on the 7th. But white maintains an advantage with queen d4. So the knight is protected, and still pressure on that knight. So in that way, white maintains an advantage. But queen f7 is a losing move after queen e5. Very strong, threatening rook e7. Queen f8 played, rook check, queen e6 check, and now it's very simple, rook f7. Double attack, so Nepo gives up the queen, but of course this is in vain. And now Vishy tidies up very nicely. Queen g6, takes the h-pawn, and king g2, and Black is running out of room for that rook. Here, Nepo resigned. If rook f4, then we've got to check on h6 to win the rook. And otherwise, well, if the rook moves that way, you take the knight on f6, and that's game over. Well, I really like Anand's style there, and that was so typical of him, of his play throughout this tournament. He kept his pieces together in a really harmonious way. He didn't make unnecessary pawn moves. He didn't go for outlandish attacks. He made it easy for himself in a really pragmatic way. And when he won the World Rapid, well, just 3 years ago, was it? I've lost track. That was an amazing result. And, he played in a very similar way, actually. And yeah, although, you can look at some of his games in this tournament and say, well, he might have missed a win along the line. Well, that's true. But I think he's found a way to play at his age. And it shows that, it's Kasparov, people say, oh, Kasparov's too old to play in this tournament. No, I don't think so. For me, or other people were saying, well, it's about preparation. Kasparov, didn't do enough opening preparation. It's not about that either. It's that you should be constantly working on your chess and playing chess. And that's what Anand has continued to do over the years. He's still looking to improve. He still works really hard at the game. And it shows in his play. He's still got it. He's still got a really fine touch. So congratulations to him for his excellent performance in this tournament, and of course to Maxime Vacher-Legrave, who actually won the event. Thanks for watching.